Okay, I think we might start. We've got a healthy number of people in, so thank you everyone for attending. My name's Ed Paterson. I'm the Manager Strategic Planning here at Kiama Council. As I said, yeah, we've got about 26 people in so far. I think we've got about 35 registered, so thank you all for attending. Before we start, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which this webinar is being recorded, the Wadi Wadi people of the Darawal Nation, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. Said before, I'd really like to thank everyone for engaging with us in this new format for Kiama Council and being part of what I hope will be a very engaging and informative session. We will be providing a recording of this session on our website, so anything that I'm saying now, people will be able to hear afterwards if they couldn't attend today, so that will be an interesting event for Council as well. The intention of tonight's information session is to provide clarity on what is a local strategic planning statement, what's its purpose, and what is it supposed to do. In a minute, I'll start the presentation. I encourage everyone that's online, if you do have questions as they arise, ask them using the question function in the toolbar on your screens, and we'll answer them at the end of the session. If we do run out of time to answer all of the questions, we'll still have them electronically stored, and I will write a response back and we'll post all of the questions and responses that we didn't get a chance to answer in this session on our website. So without further ado, let's get straight into it. I'll just see if I can get my screens working. Oh, it's changed itself. Bear with me. Okay. Okay, as I said, we're here to talk about the Kiama Local Strategic Planning Statement. So today's presentation, we're going to tackle four main questions. Number one, what is a local strategic planning statement? Number two, what has been our journey so far? Number three is a fairly long one. What is our local strategic planning statement? There's three parts of that. How does it relate to other council policies? What is the community's vision? And how are we going to achieve that vision? And then the fourth and final part of the presentation is giving everyone some ways to get involved in this final step. So for those that haven't been involved so far, a local strategic planning statement is a new requirement for all councils in New South Wales to have. It's a document that's required under the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act. It's to contain the council area's 20-year vision for land use planning. It's to identify any special characteristics which contribute to that identity. It's to include shared community values and how they're to be maintained and enhanced. And it's to deal with how growth and change is going to be managed into the future. Following on with that, there's a requirement for all councils' local strategic planning statement to be consistent with the community strategic plan that applies to the council area. It's also required to be consistent with the regional plan that applies to the wider region of councils issued through the Department of Planning. So we've had quite a lengthy program to deal with our local strategic planning statement. We haven't had a lot of major strategic planning projects in the municipality for quite some time. So we started all the way back in November 2018 by coming out and asking the community what their vision was for 20 years. And then we've worked our way through developing some options. We came back out in sort of September, October last year to test those visions. And we're at the sort of the third bright blue cog out on community exhibition at the moment with the draft that was adopted by council in February of this year. So as I said, phase one, we went out to the community. We had 3 community workshops. We got some really good numbers attending those. We had a separate workshop organised just for business and tourism operators in the area. We also went out to Kiama High School and had a session with the students there, year 11 and 12 students and the SRC students. And we also invited representatives from all the primary schools in the area to come and have a session in at council, and that's the photo you can see there on the right. The purpose of these sessions was to help identify what the key priorities, issues and themes were for the community, the different locations for 20 years into the future. Phase 2 was testing what we'd heard before. So staff went offline after phase 1 and developed a whole heap of technical papers to sort of capture what the community had told us and how that related to the wider policy and legislative context. So we came back out, as I said, in September and October last year, and we held 4 community workshops, one in Jaron, one in Jamberoo, one in Kiama Downs, and one in Kiama. And we presented 7 technical papers on the themes that were identified in phase 1. So that's our story to date. Now we'll get into what's contained within the draft document that's currently on exhibition. So it's built up of 5 main parts. One is a whole heap of background information about what the LSPS is and some information about the broader Kiama area, demographic information, geographic information, regional and global information as well. The second part deals with consistency with the community strategic plan, the Kiama community strategic plan, and the Illawarra Shoalhaven regional plan. Then the third, fourth and fifth part really drill down to the main components of the statement. One is the 20-year vision for the Kiama area. Then it's the second 2 parts of that is the planning priorities to achieve that vision over the next 20 years and specific actions for achieving those planning priorities. So this is a diagram that's currently contained within the draft. It's to illustrate how the local strategic planning statement relates to the community strategic plan. So for those that aren't aware, all councils are required to have a community strategic plan, and it's basically the council's contract with the community of how it's going to run over the next 10 years. Feeding out of the community strategic plan is a 4-year delivery program that outlines what infrastructure and services and programs council's going to do. And then there's a 1-year operational plan that goes into even more detail on those, and it's reported on annually. So local strategic planning statement, as well as a number of other policy pieces that council have, all feed into that community strategic plan. So what we're trying to demonstrate with this diagram is any of the actions and planning priorities identified in the draft will feed into what council will do over the next 10, 4, 1 years to achieve those visions. This is a table it's currently contained in the draft as well, to show how consistent the LSPS currently is with the current version of the CSP. So along the top are the 7 planning priorities identified in the draft to date and how they relate with individual objectives of the community strategic plan. And I should say for those attending the webinar that you will also see on your toolbar, there is a handout drop-down menu. The draft LSPS is included in that, so if you wanted to have a look and download it that way, it is also available on our website if you haven't had a look at it yet as well. Second piece is how our local strategic planning statement is consistent with the Illawarra Shoalhaven regional plan. So that's the current plan that applies for the 4 councils in the area, being Wollongong, Shellharbour, Kiama and Shoalhaven. So the regional plan currently sets out 5 goals: 1, to have a prosperous region; 1, to provide a variety of housing choices; 1, to provide a region that have communities that are strong, healthy and well connected; the 4th is to have a region that makes appropriate uses of agricultural and resource lands, which I think is particularly encouraging for the Kiama area; and the 5th is a region that protects and enhances the natural environment, and that's certainly the case for us as well. For everyone's information, the regional plan is currently being reviewed. The Illawarra Shoalhaven regional plan is the first regional plan that was published by the Department of Planning for all of New South Wales. So lucky us, it's the first to be reviewed as well. And I think luckily for councils, we're in a position where, I'll show you in the next slide, the Kiama Local Strategic Planning Statement needs to be consistent with the regional plan and vice versa. So if we get our story right now, the review that's currently underway will need to be consistent with us as we are with them. So that's really important for us at the moment. This diagram shows the relationship between the regional plan as well as the Kiama Local Environmental Plan and other planning documents and pieces of legislation. So the local strategic planning statement, as I said before, needs to be consistent with the regional plan, but it will then also dictate all changes to our local environmental plan, or LEP if people have heard that term, our local infrastructure contribution plans, which are documents that enable council to levy developers money so that services can be provided, libraries, roads, car parks and the like, and also influence our development control plan, which has the more detailed controls for land use in the area. So that's the relationship between the LSPS and the community strategic plan and the regional plan and other planning instruments. Now we'll talk about the vision. So this is an extract from the current draft. It's obviously quite a small extract. Oh, pardon me, slides, there we go. Quite a small extract. And I seem to be having technical difficulties. There we go. So at the core of our story is a celebration of our natural settings, heritage, which support a high quality lifestyle for our community. Over the next 20 years, the Kiama municipality will leverage the area's natural and heritage settings and agricultural strengths to generate economic and social growth opportunities that continue to recognise the underlying natural and heritage values and rural and coastal strengths. So it was really clear with the first round of community engagement we did that the community value the place that they live in and work in and play in. The colours that are associated with the Kiama area, from the blue hues of the escarpment through to the rolling green hills, through to the yellow sands of our beach, and then the deep blues of the ocean. Our stunning coastline, rivers, beaches, agricultural areas really are at the heart of who we are as a community. And I think we need to ensure we don't lose sight of that going forward into the future. So as I said, this is a whittled down version of the 20-year vision that's in the draft, but I think it really captures the essence of what our vision is. So as I mentioned previously, there's been 7 planning priorities that have been identified to help achieve that vision. They're in no order of importance or numbered in any such way. They've just been given a numerical indicator for ease of reference. So I'll go through them now. The first is that we'll talk about is housing and land supply. So what we're saying in the draft statement is that we think the Kiama area needs a lower growth than previously projected. The state government, through the current Illawarra Shoalhaven regional plan, have indicated a projected dwelling need for the local government area, and we're saying that we think that's too high. What has worked out quite well for us is that in December last year, new population projections were published by the department, which confirm that, you know, we're right, that we don't need as many dwellings as the department once thought. So it's a good sign for the community that are worried about overdevelopment of the area, but we need to make sure that we are still providing dwellings as needed and that we are going to see growth in the area. And to ensure that it's done appropriately, we're saying that it needs to be a balance between new greenfield sites, so expanding some of our towns and villages, as well as finding appropriate infill solutions via increased heights or densities. But of course, associated with that is ensuring that we have appropriate development controls so that any development in the towns and villages reflect the specific characters and heritage values that we hold so dear. So I'll go into more details about the actions associated with the planning priority for housing and land supply. We're saying in the LSPS that we are only going to support the consideration of planning proposals, and that's the term used for changes to the LEP, for new greenfield suburbs and expansion sites that are identified in the maps that we've attached. And those maps have come from the Kiama Urban Strategy, and I'll show those to you in the next few slides. As I said before, we need a balance between infill and greenfield. So investigate and identify opportunities where we might be able to have different types of houses, terrace houses and other sort of more low scale, medium density within our towns and villages where appropriate. The recently adopted Kiama Town Centre study does talk about certain increases in heights and densities in some areas of the Kiama Town Centre. We're not saying that every suggestion made by that study we're going to do, so we're being very cautious by saying we're going to investigate those opportunities and implement them where appropriate. Said before, we also want to make sure that any new changes and new suburbs do have appropriate development controls that ensure that we're having balanced outcome with environment, social and landscape opportunities. The final actions in the planning priority to do with housing and landing supply is we think it's overdue time to have a look at Jaron Town Centre. A charrette was done quite some time ago and most of the ideas have come to fruition, but as with the Kiama Town Centre, we think it's time for Jaron to be looked at in some detail. The final two dot points are all about monitoring that supply of housing and the demand of housing that we're having. So councils sit on the Department of Planning's Urban Development Program, which has members of all four councils, as well as service providers such as RMS, Endeavour Energy, Sydney Water, Education, Health, to ensure that any growth that is occurring and is planned in the pipeline, the services will be there for them. We just don't have new residential areas and not enough schools to cope. These are the maps that I talked about before. So on the left of your screen is the map that deals with the Kiama area. We've got, if we start at the top of the screen, a block of land that's surplus RMS land associated with the Kiama bypass on Henry Parks Drive. So that's been identified in the urban strategy. There's also a bit of land, again, it's RMS surplus land at the top of the Bombo interchange there. Bombo Quarry is identified as well, and I'll talk to that in some further slides. There's a couple of parcels on Dido Street in the Spring Creek area, and then there's what's known as the South Kiama planning proposal, which is currently being assessed, and it should go on exhibition in the next few months. On the right-hand slide is the Jaron area. So there's a couple of blocks located within Jaron itself that are currently zoned from memory a combination of business and industrial zones, and the urban strategy, because they're currently occupied by houses, talks about that might be an opportunity to have them residentially zoned. And then the other piece of land is west of Alhambra and south of Campbell Street, and it's been identified in the urban strategy as well as the Jaron charrette. And then the third and final map deals with Jamboree. So there's a couple of blocks of land at Jarama Road. The dark shades on the far left of Jarama have already been rezoned. The strange sort of squiggly shape around Whyalla Road probably shouldn't be there. It was included as a parcel that has already been rezoned and contains residential and seniors living development on there. The major parcel is on the eastern side of Jamboree on Golden Valley Road. It has already been rezoned as well. And then the urban strategy also talks about the land joining up Whyalla and Golden Valley to the south of Macquarie Street as potential for residential expansion. So the second planning priority deals with economic growth and jobs. We want to support the 5 key job sectors from an employment rate in the Kiama area. So that's sort of not really surprising for us that it's visitor economy, i.e. tourism, the health, disability and aged care sector, ICT knowledge services, education and agriculture. To do that, we've identified a number of actions. One is to ensure we have a strong alignment to Kiama's region economic development strategy. So all councils have what's affectionately called a REDS, and it's a document that's a state government template that talks about economic development for that region specifically. So everyone is probably well aware that Kiama has a booming tourism industry. What is desired is that we spread out the demand of tourism rather than having one peak season in summer, to spread that out across the year, and rather than have more visitors, have the same number of visitors, spreading out the load across the year and have them stay overnight to spend more money. The REDS also talk about enhancing the livability of Kiama through its unique position in that we were one of the first towns to be launched on the NBN platform. So we do have the capabilities to support those sort of high-end IT services. And also the REDS talk about supporting growth in the key industries that I mentioned before, having well-planned urban and rural land development to support that. And I'll talk about that more in the following slides. The state government have also released a marine-based tourism strategy. There's a lot of suggestions in there, particularly for the South Coast, that I think would be a really good idea for us to investigate. But whilst ensuring that we do protect the marine biodiversity, that we have in the area. So for the Kiama area particularly, we want to explore opportunities for harbour activation, and really good timing for us that the local member has announced that funding is going to be available, and the project that's been on the books for so long will now start to proceed with a bit more haste for the activation of the Kiama Harbour. The marine-based tourism strategy also talks about exploring potentials to better utilise our existing coastal assets, things like surf clubs and lighthouses, to have a different and a range of uses that are complementary to each other, but also enable visitors that come to our area to enjoy the coastal attraction that we can offer. And again, that flows on to the third dot point about marine-based and natural-based experiences, fishing and aquaculture, and also ecotourism accommodation, which we'd like to play in that space as well. Continuing on, it's sort of no surprise that the Kiama Town Centre study gets another mention here. There's a lot of recommendations in that study about how to invigorate the economy of the Kiama CBD, suggestions around encouraging an evening and nighttime economy to have shops stay open later than the normal sort of 4:30 at the moment. Well, at the moment, probably even earlier than that with what we're dealing with. As I mentioned before, with Jaron, we do have a little bit of industrial land, but there's not a lot of land in the Kiama municipality that if someone wants to come and open up a small scale, bulky good operator, storage facility, car mechanic, where they can do that. We don't have much, if any, industrial land, light industrial land. We have no industrial land in the municipality. So to ensure that we're retaining some of those businesses that have in the past been moving north to Shoalhaven and south to Bomaderry Nowra, we'd like to see if we can try and retain some of them in the area to provide jobs and that service for the community. As I said, this is where we've made the mention about Bombo Quarry, which is really the golden egg for the Kiama area and the region at large. So many opportunities are provided to us when quarry operations cease in Bombo. We're at this stage not sure when that will be, and it's very likely that it could be beyond the 20-year scope of this document, but we want to ensure that we're getting ready for what it might be. So we're saying that we're going to work with the landholders, and there's a few in that quarry, as well as the relevant state agencies, to progress the strategic planning. And there's been a few plans drawn up in previous times. Some have a nice mix of business, industrial, education, residential land. Some are all commercial, some are all residential. So we're not saying one over the other, but we think we need to have a nice balance for the benefit of the local community. The third planning priority deals with agriculture. It was really evident in our first round of community consultation that the community value the rolling green hills that they and the landscape setting that provides. It was really encouraging that so many people said, we note that that's not going to be provided to us if we don't have viable agriculture, that the farmers maintain those rolling green hills, and we do not want it to just be a tourist attraction. We want them to have businesses. So I think it's really important that we stress that. And to do so, we want to protect our agricultural lands through appropriate planning controls. We want to avoid fragmentation. We want to maintain the existing land minimum lot sizes that we have in our local environmental plan so that we don't get fragmentation. People can't subdivide down too small. We also need to ensure that we manage land use conflicts between agricultural lands and adjoining residentials. So to do that, there's a couple of points we've got in here. The state government, as part of the regional plan, had an action in there that the Department of Planning and the Department of Primary Industries were going to map the Illawarra Shoalhaven and identify the different scales and importance of agricultural lands. That project has been heavily delayed, but I'm pleased to sort of announce to the group here, and once it gets published, the wider community, that it looks like that project will be finalised in the next 12 months, which is a really good win for the area. We'll have a good understanding of different soil classifications, rainfall classifications, access to services that agricultural need, and then it'll be mapped for us so that we can ensure that we have the right controls and zonings over those mapped areas. The Jamberoo community are probably well aware of a recent decision of the Land and Environment Court to deal with what's affectionately been known as a farm stay accommodation. Whilst council was successful in defeating the application through the court process, the courts did determine that to be a farm stay accommodation, you need not have a working farm, and you can pretty much occupy the entire farm with lots of cabins. We don't agree with that as an outcome. We think it's poor land use planning, and it degrades the importance of the agricultural land. The unfortunate reality that we have is that those definitions in our legislation are written by the state government, and it's difficult for council to change them. So we want to work with our neighbouring councils and the Illawarra Shoalhaven joint organisation to put pressure back on the state government, showing them that it's not just council saying we don't like decisions, that it's the wider area saying that the current controls aren't correct and don't work. We also want to work with the state government, particularly the Department of Primary Industries, to encourage better collaboration between regulators and farm businesses so that we can see some innovation in that area as well. And council participates in what's known as SPUN, the Sydney Peri-Urban Network, which is a member group of the council areas that surround the greater Sydney area that sort of provide that food bowl, so that we can leverage off the information that our colleagues have and work on similar projects and collaborations to do with ensuring our agricultural lands remain viable. The fourth planning priority is really focusing on protecting our areas of environmental significance. So we're saying that we need to promote and preserve our natural environment, wildlife habitats. We need to continue protecting Sydney drinking water catchment, which is a part of our local government area falls within. We want to ensure that the maps associated with our local environmental plan and other pieces of legislation are accurate when it comes to biodiversity and corridor mapping. And flowing on from that, we want to protect those areas from inappropriate land uses such as extractive industries or residential development. We also want to continue working towards protecting our sensitive coastal wetlands, which is a couple in our areas. So the actions associated with that is it's time that an update of our existing vegetation study is undertaken. The current study that council has dates back to 2007, so I think it's well time that we ensure that that's updated and accurate, and it has flow-on effects, which I'll get to later. As I mentioned before, then it allows us to maintain our mapping in our LEP and other documents. The council have been quite strong in advocating against further expansion of inappropriate land uses into those environmentally zoned areas. So that's very important that we stress that we're talking about pushing forward with extractive industries into currently zoned environmental protection areas. We're not saying no necessarily to extractive industries as a concept, but just not in those areas that are sensitive environments. Some of you may be aware that council is currently working towards an open coastal management plan that deals with, as it indicates, our open coast, so the beaches and the ocean there, about how we're going to manage sea level rise, sand migration and the like. So that's a program that's underway. It's also time then to prepare scoping studies to update our existing coastal zone management plans for the Minamara and Crooked Rivers and bring them into the contemporary legal framework. We also think it's time to prepare scoping studies to work towards having coastal management plans for our other estuaries like Werry Lagoon, Spring Creek, and other small estuaries, as well as the littoral rainforests that surround those areas. Our fifth planning priority deals with climate change and natural hazards. So we're saying that we need to ensure that we have our hazard mapping up to date, supporting sustainable waste management, and having a response to and mitigation plan for climate change. As I mentioned before, updating our Flora study, I got it right the first time, will ensure that we have accurate bushfire prone land management plans. And that's well overdue for the Kiama area. There's been amendments to RFS's requirements for mapping bushfire hazards, but we need to have that vegetation study done first. We also think it's time that we seek funding for and undertake a review of our existing floodplain management documents. I think it's really important to note the great success that's been had in the Kiama area about our waste recovery programs. The community should be very proud of themselves for the uptake of the organic system. It's been a raving success, and the Kiama area is really looked at as a pilot project for that implementation. So I think everyone should give themselves a pat on the back for the work that's done with regards to waste. Many of you may know the Kiama Council does not have a tip, so how we manage our waste is really important. For the Kiama area, when you look at our greenhouse gas emissions, vast majority of them come from people's places of residence. Approximately 60% of all CO2 emissions in the Kiama area come from residential development. This is not something that council can really put a lot of pressure on because it's all mandated at a state and federal level. So again, with our partners in the region and the joint organisation, we're saying I think we need to put pressure on the state government to increase the thresholds around renewables. BASIX is an acronym for Building Sustainability Index, and it's a requirement when development applications come in for new houses or significant alterations to houses that they have to meet certain thresholds. So one way of ensuring that the Kiama area worked towards zero emission targets would be to increase those thresholds. The second dot point on this slide is to ensure that council aren't saying we have no role to play when it comes to climate change adaptation mitigation. We certainly need to work on bringing together a number of existing policies that the council has and bring them into one contemporary local climate change policy. There's a number of things that the council do in regards to renewables and climate change mitigation that the community may not be aware of, and so I think that needs to be brought to the fore and also work together to have more mitigation policies in place as well, particularly being a vulnerable location on the coast. Again, I think it's important that we leverage the opportunities afforded to us through the joint organisation to have collaborative regional approaches to some of these issues and collaborative regional approaches to purchasing. As one small local government area, we may not have a lot of effect on the market when we're, say, purchasing new fleets and vehicles for the council maintenance crews to ensure that they're green and have a high star rating. But if all 4 councils in the area do it, we'll have more success in that space. Our 6th planning priority deals with ensuring that we have vibrant places to live and play and work in. So we're saying that we need to protect and enhance the local character of the towns and villages that we have, identify and protect our built European heritage. We want to ensure that we're providing the appropriate recreational cultural facilities within our towns. We want to ensure that we also protect and promote our local Aboriginal cultural heritage. So we're making it a priority action in the strategic planning statement to progress and facilitate the Kiama Arts Precinct project. Funding's continually being sought for that project, so let's keep our fingers crossed and work towards it. As I mentioned before, I think it's time that we revisit Jaron with a town centre study and hopefully have some good recommendations that we can implement to make sure it remains and enhances the viability of Jaron. The state government, via the government architect, issued some papers to deal with local character analysis and having character layers in council's local environmental plan. I'm really interested in seeing this project through, but I want to ensure that it's done for a reason. My concern at present is the papers put forward by the state government say that councils are to do character analysis and prepare character maps and controls, but then a private certifier through the complying development system doesn't need to have regard for those controls or maps. So I don't want to put the community or the council through the hardship of developing those if they can be completely ignored through the complying development process. As some of you would be aware, with the adoption of the Kiama Town Centre Study, Council committed to undertaking a review of the heritage within the Kiama town, and that's well underway at the moment with a review team being put together from representatives of the Kiama Historical Society, and we're working towards getting a consultant to come in and update everything that we've got and ensure it's current. I think it's time, and this is an approach being taken at a regional level as well, to have a look at what are the needs for recreation and cultural facilities within the community. We have lots of open green space. Are they enough? Are they the right type? Do they have the right facilities? I know it got mentioned to me when we were out at Jaron last year with the phase 2 that with an aging population, some would assume that we need less parks and gardens, but this community member said to me, yes, but us that are retired are looking after our grandkids and taking them to the park. So we need to ensure that there's adequate shading for grandparents and seating for those that are taking care of children as well. So it's ensuring not only that we have enough open green space, that we provide the right infrastructure there as well. Again, I think it's really important for the community to be commended on having such an accessible town and villages, and we want to continue working towards that. There's certainly been some recommendations in the Kiama Town Centre study regarding the appropriateness of rumble strips and pedestrian crossings and the like in the area, so we want to ensure that we remain accessible to all people and work towards becoming even more so if we can. And the final dot point talks about seeking funding to investigate celebrating and protecting Aboriginal cultural heritage. It's really important that we ensure this is done appropriately in conjunction with the local Aboriginal community, and it is something that's currently underway with Council trying to work with the community to start this project. So I think if we can get it up and running, it'll be really good. So the 7th and final planning priority deals with the provision of utility infrastructure. So we want to ensure that we provide what is required and what is appropriate. We want to ensure that the residents are connected to the local area as well as the region at large. As I mentioned before, we want to ensure that those utility services are monitored when new developments are likely to come on. We also want to take any opportunities we can to embrace smart infrastructure. So the actions associated with this planning priority are to prepare and finalise a new local infrastructure contribution planning framework. As I mentioned in one of the previous slides, this is documentation and legislation that enables council to levy developers a fraction of and a percentage of their development cost to go towards the provision of services, libraries, parks, car parks, roads, that sort of infrastructure. As part of that work, and it came out of the town centre study adoption as well, is undertaking the Kiama traffic and parking study. Council's engineering department are working on that at the moment. Again, it's important that the council continues to participate in the department's urban development project to ensure that the wider servicing community are aware of what our needs are now and into the future. And we're going to continue to be part of the review of the regional plan. And as we did when we put in the bid for the autonomous vehicle for Terralong Street, we'll continue to embrace and seek opportunities to implement smart and innovative infrastructure where we can. So as I said, the 4th and final question that I'll answer for people today in the webinar is how can you get involved in this stage? So we're currently out on exhibition. The exhibition period started on the 23rd of March. It was due to finish on Monday, the 20th of April, but with everything that's going on in the world in regards to COVID-19, we've extended it out into the 4th of May to enable us to hold tonight's webinar session. As you see below, we did manage to hold one face-to-face session at Joyce Wheatley Centre in Kiama on the 14th of March, and we had about 20 attendees there. It was a really good session. We had 4 others planned, but unfortunately they all had to be cancelled. We're sort of trying to replace them with tonight's session and the recordings of it. So as I mentioned before, it's currently on exhibition. You can see the document in the handouts attached in your toolbar, and it's also available on Council's website. We are starting to receive submissions, and I welcome the more the merrier. So please put your submissions in writing, attentioning them to the General Manager and quoting the number that you see there on the screen. Okay. So, see, has anyone been putting in any questions? I've got trusted helper. Yes, Rachel, how have we got?
Hello. We have some questions. I feel like I'm on a game show. All right. We have first question about Illawarra Road, Jamberoo. A very small screen. Does Kiama Council have a vision for development in Jamberoo? Will this be in the strategic plan? If so, what would be the timings?
Yep. I think the best way to answer that is with the slides that show the map for the Jamberoo area. That's really what Council is saying is appropriate for urban expansion of Jamberoo. When it comes to, say, infill development and what commercial areas may look like, the local strategic planning statement doesn't go into that detail.
Thank you, Ed. Right, the next question. What is Council planning to do to attract more business or employment in Jamberoo to service existing and possibly new families in the town? I promise I haven't written these Jamberoo questions.
Yes, I'm sure you haven't. Yeah, again, I think the planning priority that deals with economic development and growth, we're talking about economic development and growth for the Kiama area at large. So supporting the development of those key sectors that I mentioned on the screen, being visitor accommodation, health and disability and aged care sector, pardon me, education, IT and agriculture. We're not definitively saying in one town or village over the other, but we're going to support them in general, and any way that we can do that for the Jamberoo community, we will look into.
Okay, next question. Is the council prepared to improve infrastructure for the town?
Yep, certainly are. As I said, the final planning priority deals with infrastructure. So some of the infrastructure we are responsible for, being roads, parks and gardens, and that's part of the work that we're going to do with the infrastructure contribution plan. The other parts being sewage, water, electricity and things. We're going to continue to work with those suppliers to ensure that with the change and growth that we do see in our towns and villages, that they can meet those requirements.
Is the council open to green developments, aged care managed villages and overnight accommodation to support the theme park and local attractions? Mudgee has wine, every town has a theme, so does council have a theme for Jamberoo?
Sure you haven't been asking all these
No,
Jamboree?
lots of Jamberoo.
Yeah. The local strategic planning statement doesn't identify a particular theme for one town or village over the other. I think it's really important that we don't delve into such a fine grain level of detail. As I mentioned before, the relationship between this local strategic planning statement and council's other planning documents, namely the LEP and DCP, if there's ever a request to make changes to those and it's not consistent with the LSPS, we have to say no. So if the LSPS says the theme for Jamberoo is dairy, and so we'll only support the dairy industry in the area, if an application comes in that's a really innovative idea and supported by the community, we wouldn't be able to accept it. So I think it's really important that we keep it at a high level, and say that we're going to support development of the key sectors in the area by implementing the recommendations of, as I said, the REDS and the marine-based tourism plan strategy.
Okay, another one. When and how does council intend to identify agricultural land?
Yep, that may have come up before I answered on the slide. So that's a project that the state government are undertaking, and that project should be finalised this year.
How does council work out a location of urban boundaries?
So the maps that are currently contained within the LSPS that I showed in these slides, they came from the Kiama Urban Strategy, which was a document prepared back in 2011. There was a team of community members and council members that reviewed a number of requests to have their properties rezoned to either residential or commercial as part of preparing the 2011 local environmental plan. So that's where those maps came from. So they went through a review process that was involving the community members and the councillors. Yeah, so I think that answers that question.
Okay. How does the expansion of extractive industries such as sand mining fit into the position, council is presenting here? Yeah, that's the end of the sentence. Sorry, it's a small box. It's presenting here.
Can you repeat that? Sorry, Rachel.
Yes, sorry. How does the expansion of extractive industries such as sand mining fit into the position that the council is presenting here?
Yep. Okay. I think it's really important to note that we're not saying extractive industries are sort of not welcome in the Kiama area, because I think that would be an ironic twist of fate in that our heritage is quite often based around the extractive industries associated with basalt at the time. What we are making the point in the LSPS of saying is that we do not want to see the expansion of such land uses into environmentally significant areas. So those areas that are currently zoned E2, which sitting below our national parks, that's our highest level of environmental protection zone. Sure. We wouldn't want to see extractive industries expand into there.
Okay. If there is no clear base data for housing demand in terms of affordable housing and housing of different tenures, how will council be able to set up goals and monitor change? Also, the local community is not a robust source of data for setting targets for a affordable housing or tenure diversity. Who will you be collaborating with to set these targets?
I think it's really important to note that we're not setting any targets. We're maintaining that we're flexible in that sense, that we don't want to set a target and all of a sudden demand changes across the country and the globe. So I think it's really important to make that point first. What we are saying in the local strategic planning statement is that we will not support any additional greenfield expansion apart from those shown on the maps. And then when it comes to different types of housing, whether it be affordable or any of the other types of housing that were mentioned, I think in your first question about seniors living as well, we will tackle them on a case-by-case basis as applications come in. The conversation around affordable housing was had when we ran our phase 2 exhibition period, and I think it's really important for the community to understand that there are a number of legal mechanisms that can require applicants to provide affordable housing when they're doing developments. But what it means is that council needs to provide either additional greenfield sites or allow increases in heights and densities, which I would suggest is probably at odds with the desire to maintain our existing sort of village feel and character of our towns and villages. So it's sort of important to temper any comments about affordable housing with that legal and legislative framework. We're in a unique position as well that if we look at ourselves as part of the region, there are other places within 10-15 minute drive that can provide affordable housing as required. So I hope that answers that question. If it doesn't, email me and we'll be in touch.
It's probably worth a note, there's quite a few questions, Ed, so we probably haven't got time for all of them. It's probably worth mentioning that all of these questions can be posted and answered.
If there's any questions that we don't get to, yeah, we'll post and I'll write a response to them.
Yeah, so here's another one, it's quite long. Would Planning Priority 6 or some other planning instrument incorporate the handling and preservation of Blowhole Point? Community would no doubt be concerned by developer interest in that area over recent years. Can Council comment on its position now and into the future regarding the conservation of this environmental and tourism asset?
Yeah, Blowhole Point's a really unique landscape and sort of both physically and legally. The whole site is Crown land, and it's going through a process at the moment that some of the community members may be aware of, that under the Crown Land Management Act, council are required to classify all Crown land that they manage. The council at the February meeting resolved to classify that land as community land, which means that plan and managements need to be prepared that spell out exactly to the letter what can and cannot happen on those parcels. That's a process that's about to commence, and it's heavily going to involve the community about how they want to see their community land managed now and into the future. So it's a process that's underway, and it sort of sits under a separate piece of legislation, so to speak, and that's why it hasn't been commented on necessarily under this document. Once a plan of management's in place that says this is exactly how it's going to be used, if a developer comes along and wants to put in a motel accommodation and the plan of management says no motel accommodation, that's the end of the story. Great.
We might make this the last one. Thanks, Ed. Great. So thanks, Ed. Great presentation. Could you comment on when and how the LSPS will be reviewed in the future, as 20 years is a long time into the future to try and assess housing needs?
Yep, so the plan in the document, if people do want a bit of light reading before they go to bed tonight, is that we have made the statement that the actions that we have identified will be reviewed every 4 years. that aligns with the review of the community strategic plan and of course the election of council. With the deferral of this year's election, that's potentially going to cause us some headaches, but that's the plan. So all of those actions that we've got in the draft now, we are saying we will complete in the next 4-year period, and we'll review and come back out and do something similar to this now to say this is our next lot of actions for the next 4 years.
Thanks.
All right, so thank you everyone for attending. As I said before, this recording will go up on our website along with the questions that I didn't get a chance to answer tonight, as well as obviously some answers to those. Once I turn off the recording, you should also receive a very short, I promise, survey to give us some feedback. So this is the first time we've done this, so any feedback that you do have, that would be great. So thank you all for attending. Go enjoy your dinner if you haven't already had it, and keep safe in the times that we're in at the moment. And I look forward to seeing more submissions come in and